Alright, this is part 2 of reading more of Manly P. Hall's Orders of the Quest. And so far, again, you have some more admissions from a person of the mystery schools, Manly P. Hall, where he admits that there is an invisible government of the world, you know, the typical Illuminati stuff, and so this is just more building up the proof and evidence and stuff. There is definitely a conspiracy among secret societies. Turn the brightness on. There we go, enough of that. Okay. I've been playing music like in the beginning of my videos just because sometimes I feel like there might be a song or something that's really related to the subject matter, or that's related to the mood, you know, brings the mood, you know, of the subject of what I'm reading. And, you know, some of it's kind of more on the darker side. My last couple videos I played a little bit of Johnny Cash, or I played a little bit of musical background in my last video just to, you know, I don't know, it brings a little bit more to it, I guess. It's just really experimenting with it. See how it goes. Like I said, what I do ain't that fancy, but, you know, you can do what you want these days on social media as long as you don't talk about certain subjects like, you know, 2 + 2 = 4. You know, like with the virus and the lockdowns, and, you know, I don't even know if I can even say this, Pizzagate. We'll just see. I might take my video down if they caught me using the word Pizzagate. I don't know, but tried making a few videos on that, and video just got taken down. So this is page 15 of this book, by the way. On the group, the Albigenses. I've noticed since I've been starting, I haven't read this book in over 10 years, but I noticed that some of these words are just, you know, it's difficult for me to pronounce, but that's spelled Albigenses. So would it be Albigenses? Or Albigenses? I don't know. But anyways, in order to appreciate the degree of organized resistance that developed in Europe against the remnants of the pagan philosophical schools, it is only necessary to consider the fate of the Albigensian heretics. The sect originated in Manichaeism, a school of esoteric philosophy which exercised a considerable influence over the early life of St. Augustine. Later, these pious men devoted much time and many words to a bitter denunciation of the heresiarch Manes. It is probable that the Albigenses originated in Bulgaria, but their principal stronghold was in southern France, where they created a considerable stir during the 12th and 13th centuries. So thoroughly were the Albigensian doctrines stamped out by the Roman Church that it is almost impossible to restore the structure of their beliefs. We know that they were Catharists, believing in the ultimate salvation of all men. They were devout Christians, but rejected the machinery of the Church, and taught that any who died without being reconciled to God through the mystery of Christ would be born again in the physical world as a human being or an animal. The Catharists baptized by the laying on of hands and taught that the kingdom of Christ was a mystery of the Spirit and not of this world. So, hang on, get situated here. The Albigenses also derived inspiration from the Bogomiles, a religious community of considerable antiquity which inspired many of the unorthodox sects of Russia. The Bogomiles denied the miraculous birth of Christ, rejected most of the sacraments of the Church, baptized only adults, had no formal places of worship, and interpreted the miracles of Jesus mystically rather than literally. They had the quaint notion that Satan was responsible for setting up all the churches of Christendom as a means of destroying human souls. That is Satan to the mystery schools, as we know, is Typhon in the Egyptian mystery schools is really, if you think about it, is really the God of the Old Testament, the God of basically the God that of the Judeo-Christian world, whatever. But it is quite understandable that in 1209, Pope Innocent III obliged the Cistercians to preach a crusade against the Albigensian heretics. In the civil war that followed, the provincial civilization was destroyed, but the Albigenses survived. About 30 years later, the Inquisition stepped in with better success. Maurice Mager writes of the Albigenses thus, quote, "I feel indignant at a great injustice which has never been remedied and seems unlikely to be remedied. Those self-controlled, unassuming men who lived in southern France during the 13th century, whose practical rule was poverty, and whose ideal was love of their fellow men, were exterminated, and calumny has triumphantly wiped out even their name and their memory. Calumny has been so active and so skillful that the descendants of these wonderful men are unaware of the noble history of their ancestors, and when they wish to learn it, it is presented in such a fashion that they blush at their extraordinary past. It seems that some of the Catharist communities practiced a mode of life strongly reminiscent of the Syrian Essenes. C.W. Heckthorn gives us an excellent summary of their doctrine and conduct. Quote, "In spite of the Church, many Italian cities, including Milan, Florence, Naples, and even Rome itself, were centers of Cathari activity. A Cathari concealed its doctrines from all but its higher initiates. It taught metempsychosis, assuming that to attain the light, 7 such transmigrations were required. This, however, may possibly refer to the degrees of their initiation. They rejected the Old Testament account of the creation and had communistic tendencies. Very interesting. Were adverse to marriage, were philanthropists. They lived industrious lives, combining saving habits with charity, founded schools, hospitals. They performed their ceremonies in forests, caverns, and remote valleys. At his initiation, the novice received a garment made of fine linen and wool, which he wore under his shirt. The women received a girdle which they wore next to the skin above the waist. The same author describes the fate of Dolcino, one of the leaders of the Italian Catharists. Dolcino, that's spelled, because I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing that correctly, or Dolcino, Dolcino, D-O-L-C-I-N-O. He and his wife Margaret were pursued by the Inquisition in 1307. They were captured and torn to pieces, limb by limb, and the pieces afterwards burned by the public executioner. 15 years later, 30 of Dolcino's disciples were burned alive in the marketplace at Padua. The remnants of these so-called heretical movements found some refuge in Eastern Europe, in areas which came under the political domination of the Turks. Under the general name Albigenses, these several schools of primitive and mystical Christianity bestowed their life and vitality upon the Knights Templars, the Rosicrucians, and later by descent upon the Bavarian Illuminists. It's the Illuminati. The Crusaders brought back to Europe the Eastern Manichaeism with its rationalizing and moderating influences. Reforms long overdue began to stir beneath the surface of the medieval world. As one writer has expressed it, philosophy, republicanism, and industry assailed the Holy See, unquote. It is known that the inner council of the Albigenses consisted of initiates whose method of development was not dissimilar to that of the Gnostics or the Neoplatonists. These initiates were internally enlightened men dedicated to the perpetuation of Plato's concepts of the philosophic empire and the philosopher king. When you're listening to Manly P. Hall, like in the Secret Teachings of All Ages, when he's referring to that philosophic empire, it's the New Atlantis, kind of the Golden Age, a more New World Order language. Just letting you know. Only those who lived the Christian life could know the Christian doctrine. By the end of the 14th century, the sect disappeared entirely, as such physical power as it may have been said to enjoy was entirely destroyed. This so-called power was simply an appeal to virtue, and at no time did the sect exhibit any physical ambitions other than those of justice, charity, and humility. It is certain that the adepts of the Albigenses, Catharists, and Bogomiles did not perish with the fall of their schools. Such a sacrifice would have accomplished nothing of practical benefit to mankind. They chose to remain hidden and to create new channels for the dissemination of their doctrines. These channels changed their appearance to meet the requirements of time and place. Thus, there is no break in the esoteric descent of essential truths, even though the physical institutions were destroyed by the fanaticism and cruelty of an unbelieving world. And now we're on to the glory of the guilds. It is now fairly well established that the art of papermaking was brought to Europe from the Near East by the Crusaders returning from the Holy Land, or by the Moors who established their culture in Spain. Indications seem to point to China as the country responsible for the invention of paper. Harold Bailey opens a large subject when he writes, quote, "It is a fact, the significance of which has hitherto been unnoticed, that the early paper-making districts were precisely those that were strongholds of the heretical sects known as the Albigenses. The word Albigenses is a term applied loosely to the various pre-Reformation reformers whose strongholds stretched from northern Spain across the southern provinces of France, from Lombardy to Tuscany. Papermaking opened the way for printing in Europe. Printing from movable type also was invented in China or Korea at least 200 years before its appearance in Europe. The histories of European papermaking and printing are exceedingly vague. Almost nothing is known of the circumstances leading to the production of books in the West. Bailey made an extensive study of the watermarks, headpieces, and colophons appearing in early books. He is convinced that these indicate the existence of a secret religious tradition or spiritual communion by which these artisans constituted an esoteric fraternity or brotherhood. The persecution of the Albigenses scattered the masters of the sect over the entire continent. The higher initiates of the Albigenses were called the Perfect Ones, and according to one writer in the year AD 1240, at least 4,000 of these Perfect Ones were wandering about Europe in various disguises as troubadours, peddlers, merchants, and journeymen. These artisans and craftsmen established themselves in their chosen crafts and trades, and from them descended many distinguished printing establishments. That these printers were members of a secret order explains a situation otherwise completely incredible. In the great period of the publication of books and tracts dealing with alchemy, Kabbalism, magic, Rosicrucianism, and the projected reformation of the arts and sciences, an unusual situation arose. Most of the books were published anonymously or under pseudonyms. In many cases, elaborate ciphers were incorporated into the text, and curious emblems and symbolical figures were introduced. Such an elaborate program involving printers in several countries operating with extreme secrecy would not have been possible without the complete cooperation of the printers themselves. In spite of bribery, threat, and persecution, the printers revealed neither the sources of the manuscripts which they published nor the true names of the authors. If it can be proved, as present indications suggest, that the printers, typesetters, and engravers were themselves citizens of the same invisible commonwealth as the authors, philosophers, mystics, and scholars, the dimensions of the project become clearly defined. Take, for example, the famous jug watermark found in the paper on which most of the first editions of the writings of Lord Bacon were printed. I think that's Sir Francis Bacon. This jug recurs also in many of the publications involved in the early Rosicrucian controversy. The jug is a vase or pitcher, sometimes shown filled with fruit or grapes. Barley believes that this vase or pitcher is the Holy Grail. He supports his conviction with many ingenious examples of this vase, which can be traced directly to the Albigensian papermakers. In my library is a copy of Burton's Anatomy of Melancholy with the vase watermark. On one leaf only, the dedication page, appears an entirely different watermark, consisting of a heart that contains within it a crucified rose. This is a complete Rosicrucian emblem, and the book itself contains references to the Rosicrucians. Right there. It's interesting, isn't it? Those who doubt the existence of hidden texts within certain books of the late 16th and early 17th centuries have always objected on the grounds that printers would have to be a party to the secret text that could not have been prevented from exposing the facts in the course of time. Also, a vast amount of labor, which would have been extremely costly, would necessarily be involved. If, however, the printers were performing a latter labor of love, were themselves initiates of a secret order, these objections are no longer valid. After the invention of printing, the myths, legends, and fables of the troubadours and jongleurs gradually drifted toward their final published forms. In almost every instance, the so-called authors of these curious works merely acted as editors or compilers of earlier fictions. The medieval mind was not addicted to fictional literature such as is popular in the present century. Most works in a lighter vein were morality fables, or else were burdened with social or political significance. Most of these slighter productions were tinged with heresy and perpetuated the humanism of the Trouvères. The Ship of Fools, first printed in Germany in 1494, is an early example of a school of satirical writing attacking the prevailing foibles and follies of the day. Little is known of Alexander Barclay, who is credited with the authorship of this outstanding poem. The spirit of the book reflects an intellectual transition from mental serfdom to that state of intellectual revolution which made possible the right of free thought. Although but little read in these days, the Beast epic, Reynard the Fox, which originated apparently in France near the border of Flanders, was one of the most popular works of folklore. Harold Bailey writes of this cycle of animal stories thus, quote, "The stories of how Reynard the Fox outwitted his traditional enemy Insigrim the Wolf were popular in Europe for many centuries. If we substitute heresy for Reynard and Rome for Insigrim, we can understand why these seemingly childish stories enjoyed such an immense vogue. These heretic foxes, precipitantly said Gregory IX, quote, have different faces, but they all hang together by the tails, unquote. Unfortunately, the French originals of the stories are lost, but it is safe to assume that they originated in the 13th century among those same troubadours who found so many adroit means of discomfiting the monkish orders. The Dance of Death is the name generally given to a series of pictures and moral compositions intended to remind the thoughtful of the impermanence of material dignities and honors. The symbolism originated in pagan antiquity, but the development of the theme is now associated with Swiss artists working in Basel in the late 13th and early 14th centuries. This version of La Danse Macabre is referred to as the Basel Recension. It seems to me that this cycle of morality emblems is part of the humanist motion. All the designs point to death as the destroyer of the artificial preferments bestowed by wealth, heredity, and political conspiracy. The rich and the poor, the great and the small, the high and the low, are called from their various preoccupations by the drums of death. No one is immune, and thus all ambitions are part of the passing vanity of the world. The pictures preached a powerful message against privileged classes and recommended that the human being dedicate his life to the accumulation of those special treasures which cannot be taken from him by the capering skeleton. In death, the pope and the peasant, the king and the beggar, dance together to the pipes of the unwelcome musician. That's interesting, isn't it? The English legendary hero Robin Hood, the last of the Saxons, arose in the first half of the 14th century. This bold yeoman, you know what, tell you the truth, I have never, hope I'm not sounding stupid here, but I don't think I ever seen that word before. It's yeoman, Y-E-O-M-A-N. So, yeoman, pronouncing that right, is said to have flourished at the time of Richard Coeur de Lion. And as the legends grew, this outlaw became the culture hero of the bourgeoisie, as King Arthur was the culture hero of the aristocracy. Robin Hood was an operating humanist. Not only was he a Saxon against the Normans, but he stole from the rich and gave to the poor. He was devoutly religious, but found immense satisfaction in plaguing plump abbots and pompous clerics of all degrees. He stood for the free life and was distinctly the Superman of his day. Here again the storytellers preached a gospel of equality and democracy, and strengthened that love of liberty in the hearts of all just men. Now, liberty has a much different definition to, as I read in my last video with Alice Bailey, to the secret societies. Them words have a completely different meaning to what you think it means. Same thing with democracy. Democracy, people think of freedom too, but as I don't know which communist said it, I don't remember, but one of them said that democracy is basically the same similar thing as socialism. I'm paraphrasing what he said, but it was something like that. Democracy always leads to socialism. And you have the verification with this book so far, and with the last ones, that at the heart of many of these brotherhoods is the socialist world utopia. Now, I already did videos in the past on the some other secret societies that appear to be against that, like some of R. Swinburne Clymer's work definitely was against that idea, at least unwritten in his books and written paper. But again, that could have just been controlled opposition, or to get the people around that area that join the secret societies at the lower levels to think that, who knows? I don't know. They're secret societies. How can you fully trust them anyways? But I think that there's still, if we were to just, through my research anyways, I discovered that there's actually two competing factions. There's either two competing factions, or again, this is just fake theater within the drama theater amongst these secret societies, where they pretend to war with each other, but they're really at the top, united in their quest for, basically the same New World Order. It's just different roads to bring that in, I guess. You have the Grand Lodge of France, which is where all the socialist revolutionary movements sprang from, I believe. That's one of them anyways. And then you have the Great Lodge of Britain or whatever, and these other lodges that promoted more republicanism, or that were more deists, I would have to say, at least in the outer teachings. Okay, so I'll just keep reading. Page 25, I'm on. Maid Marian appears much as in the romances of the troubadours, and in the development of the secret fraternity of the Greenwood. We have a parallel with the courts of love and honor sung by the minstrels of Brittany and Provence. Usually the printers included secret marks in their books, or engravings to indicate the presence of a cipher, or double meaning. Large and intricate initial letters, including curious designs, sometimes serve the same purpose. Most of the enigmas and rebuses have never been solved because of the prevailing indifference to the motives behind the motions of history. Even where it is suspected, as in the case of Gulliver's Travels, that a satire was intended, it is assumed that the author wrote entirely on his own responsibility according to his own taste. It has not occurred to bibliophiles generally that the writers themselves might be bound into a secret league and be operating according to a formal plan. We should pause to consider the bookbinders, for these men also belonged to a guild and were in a position to perpetuate many curious emblems and figures on the covers of books. Unfortunately, bindings are more fragile than the contents of the volumes, and only in museums and very large private collections can the student examine a representative group of original 15th and 16th century bookbindings. The traditional designs and ornaments include symbols known to have belonged to the Albigensian cult and the secret societies dominating the transitional period in European culture. As the result of a certain confraternity, which included within itself the various trade guilds, other landmarks were left to guide the observing searcher. European public buildings, especially cathedrals, libraries, and tombs, were adorned with innumerable devices, in no way parts of the approved designs. Often these embellishments were concealed in obscure places, but scarcely a medieval structure has survived which does not include the symbols and signatures of the secret societies. The conspiracy See, he admits there was a conspiracy. The conspiracy extended through the entire world of the arts. According to a Masonic-approved scholar, and he was approved in his obituary, they gave him the 33rd honorary degree, and he spoke at Masonic lodges all the time, so they obviously approved of him. And he said Manly P. Hall was probably a part of other secret societies. He might have been a part of the Illuminati itself. I mean, he probably was. But anyways, the conspiracy, he admits, extended through the entire world of the arts. This broad dissemination was only possible because the separate guilds and unions were aware of the high purpose for which the guild system had been established. The guilds formed a link between the troubadours and the trade unions. The trade unions were societies of artisans, nourished by the apprentice system. The secrets of various arts and crafts were jealously guarded by the guild masters, whose arms and crest dangled from hooks around the great guild cup in the midst of their lodge. This guild cup was again the chalice of Bacchus, the Holy Grail, and the symbolical cup of the mysteries. The chalice of Bacchus, that was like a devil, or that was like a horned beast. Some say, I think it's where they get the, how the medieval times they conceived of the devil as having horns and stuff. Some people say that that's where medieval church got their ideas of what the devil would look like. Is inspired by the pagan god Bacchus. The guild masters used the language of their crafts to conceal the mysticism of the great humanist Reformation. See, I'll say that again. The guild masters used the language of their crafts to conceal the mysticism of the great humanist Reformation. Each guild taught the universal mystery in the language of its own art. Thus, within architectural terms, the stonemasons concealed the building of the universal temple of the brotherhood of man. Remember, like that song I did a few videos ago on showing that video, a clip of that old movie in the 50s. It was like a musical, The Brotherhood of Man. It's great to be a part of that fraternity. There you go. And when he says that, Universal Temple of the Brotherhood of Man, what do you think he's talking about? What do you think John Lennon meant when he said the Brotherhood of Man? World Socialist Government. The guild system took deep roots in Germany, but was also well established in other countries on the continent and in England. So far as the world knew, the guilds were simply trade unions, but there was scarcely one of them which was not influenced to some degree by the old heresy of Mainz. It is difficult to distinguish the details of the transition which resulted in the emergence of the German Minnesingers from the older body of the bards and the troubadours. The term Minnesang, Minne, M-I-N-N-E, meaning love, was originally applied to the song or poem written by a knight to express his passionate devotion to the mistress of his heart. It was not long, however, before the term took on a wider meaning to include all music and poetry, religious, political, and amorous. The principles of the Minnesang reached Germany from Provence, which was one of the last strongholds of the Albigensian troubadours. The kings of Provence were patrons of the arts, and under their protection there was a brief flowering of song and poetry. Most of the Minnesingers were drawn from the ranks of the gentry, and it was only natural that the less privileged classes should develop their version of the same convictions. Out of the Minnesingers, with their combination of mournful tunes and also from the music of the peasantry, evolved the Meistersingers, the Burgher, B-U-R-G-H-E-R, the Burgher, whatever, musicians of Germany. For the most part, the order was composed of artisans, good solid citizens with long coats, square-toed shoes, or unorthodox religious convictions. They were good, practical men, hard-working, shrewd, and skillful in their crafts. Few, if any, had received formal education in music, and their talents were natural rather than acquired. The long shadow of the Manichaean doctrine reached into the guild halls and even into the somber cloisters of the cathedrals. The guilds were champions of the human cause, institutions of fair play and honest practice. They were cooperatives, protecting their members from society in general, and protecting society from shoddy goods and unreasonable exploitation. In a quiet way, the guild masters legislated the life of the times, and these solid, good-hearted citizens endeavored in all things to judge righteous judgment. What better place could be found in which to plant the seeds of the democratic dream? From these small centers of self-government might flow the concept of the World Guild, the World Commonwealth, indeed the Philosophic Empire, aka the New World Order. I added that in, aka the New World Order. And the democratic dream, and what is that? That's not freedom. I mean, look at the Democrats today. I mean, they're the biggest tyrants ever since this whole thing started with COVID. I mean, especially that New York Mayor de Blasio. Oh, that guy. Thank God that I was in Iowa when this thing, thank God that I live here when this thing started. I couldn't imagine being in New York City or those other socialist states. Oh, especially New York City, my God. The Meistersingers declared their order to have originated with 12 guild poets, who had derived their inspiration from the troubadours and the Minnesingers. The very selection of this number and its use in their symbolism suggests that the order originated in the old mystery systems, which always celebrated 12 gods, 12 prophets, 12 patriarchs, and 12 disciples. When we attempt to trace the 12 guild poets of the Middle High German, we come immediately upon the most celebrated name associated with the Minnesang, Wolfram von Eschenbach. He competed in the tourney of the poets known as the Wartburgskrieg. This episode is preserved for music lovers in Wagner's opera Tannhäuser. The place occupied by von Eschenbach, spelled Eschenbach, in the descent of the Orders of the Quest will be given greater consideration than the sections devoted to the Grail legends. And now we're on the Knights Templars, and I will finish that. I'll read on that tomorrow. But until that time, again, we just have just every single book that I read on the mystery schools. It's all they talk about. An inner body of initiates, guiding human evolution, guiding our destiny. This is the age of the New World Order. So, very far from a conspiracy theory, as people who probably view this channel already know, but it'd be nice to share these videos and tell people about this channel too, who believe it's just a conspiracy theory, because I have the proof and it's irrefutable. And so, yep. Thank you for listening. Take care.